Welcome to this Roundup. The World Wide Web has brought a quiet revolution that is impacting individuals and entities across nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia, in short referred to as NGIOA, in cyberspace, geospace, and space, in short referred to as CGS. Now, when the World Wide Web fundamentally transforms the way we communicate, it is becoming increasingly clear that it has brought us not only much needed connectivity across CGS, but also an explosion in information sharing capabilities through social networking between individuals and entities across NGIOA. As individuals and entities take a step forward in how they communicate, interact, socialize, manage, govern, conduct business, and deliver digital services, there is a need for caution. As World Wide Web, web infrastructure, websites, and web applications have been and are becoming more vulnerable to security challenges. Evaluating the security risk of web application is now a necessity. Along with the security of the web applications themselves, there is also a need for more focus on the security of the underlying computer network, operating systems, and host servers. To discuss this further, I'm delighted to welcome Jason Kent from Qualys. Jason is the Vice President of Product Management, Web Application Security at Qualys. Welcome, Jason. We are delighted to have you on this Roundup.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful, Jason. So, it is reported that there are over thousands of cyber attacks happening every single day across nations, hundreds of attacks every hour, and nearly few attacks every minute. Either somebody's identity is getting stolen, or somebody's confidential data is stolen, or someone falls prey to financial loss or reputation or character assassination as a result of the ongoing cyber crimes. So the question is, when so many cyber crimes are occurring across nations and all its components, does web application play a role here?
Yeah, it does. And what we're seeing with a lot of the largest breaches out there, the biggest data loss that we've seen, usually comes from a web application attack. Also, the proliferation of malware today is spread around by web servers that have been taken over. So if you look at the Verizon data breach incident report, which is the cornerstone report that talks about web application security, you'll see that there were, last year in 2015, there were about 2,200 organizations that had data leave their network. And 40% of those attacks happened through the website. The rest were either malicious insiders or some kind of dropped malware that allowed for somebody to become an insider. But that 40%, if we just focus on that number, it really tells a big story. But when you step aside from that number and look at 20,000 web servers taken over to just spread malware so that we can get into more organizations, you see that the web creates an attack surface that's so large, most organizations just don't understand how to rein it in, right, and really understand how to secure it.
Yes, yes, absolutely, and that is a large number. You are absolutely right about that. Now, security vulnerabilities could compromise not only the financial situation or security or survivability of any individual or entity across NGIOA, but it could also jeopardize the future sustainability. Now, with millions of cyber attacks, cyber attacks happening every single day, cyber crime seems to be a real threat to anyone using computers or smartphones or tablets or Internet of Things or any other gadgets on the web. Now, as you mentioned, there are almost half of all the breaches involve web applications. So what are the top web application vulnerabilities you see? What are those entry points that you see that are, allowing this kind of security threats?
So if you look at OWASP tracks this by a top 10. They develop a top 10 every year. And the top 3 have to do with compromising a website in a way that either tricks a user. So we do cross-site scripting or cross-site request forgery that's tricking a user into doing something, but they don't realize that it's happening. So it's happening in the background. Or it's direct injected attacks toward a database. So You present me with a login page. I can use that login page to exfiltrate all of the usernames and passwords sitting in the database behind it. That's called a SQL injection attack or an injection attack. The danger there is, you're going to lose all of that data and you're going to have to go reset everybody's passwords. That's going to be no fun. But the real danger is the humans that put the usernames and passwords in probably reuse those usernames and passwords in other places. And so now you've got a list of compromisable individuals out there. So when we look at the kinds of cybercrime that are coming down the line and the sorts of things that we need to pay attention to, those three at the top of the OWASP list are really important, and there's something that we have to have a tremendous amount of focus for. And the reality is most organizations, big enterprises, banks, insurance companies, they'll pay attention to that one website, the one that you go log into. But I work with organizations that have 10,000 applications. You can't just focus on one when you have 10,000. You have to focus on everyone.
Yes, that is very true. Now, security threats seems to be multiplying all across nations, and they're targeting all its components, as we've been talking. Now, serious damage is inflicted by criminals who manipulate cyberspace vulnerabilities against the user systems. That is, it could be individuals or entities that are not proactive, prepared, or protected. Now, the number of security incidents are growing faster than security professionals can comprehend, and the consequences seems to be very frightful. So, amidst that, is it fair to say that the preferred method for attacking assets in cyberspace or geospace is via applications?
Yeah, well, we see a lot of that, right? What we're trying to get everybody to understand is that the sensitivity of the data that we're proliferating around the world needs to be understood, that you're not just holding someone's name, right? You have their personal identity. You have all of the things that you need to establish credit, take things out of banks, all of the different reasons why you would want to do identity theft. I mean, there's a ton of things around it. So when we look at this, it has to be one of those things that cybersecurity and focus on web application security needs to grow. We're seeing huge challenges with it, though. There aren't that many professionals in the world that understand these things.
Yes, very true. Now, it seems that software security, application security, and network security is currently a never-ending battle as new criminal players emerge every day and new methods of cyber attacks are increasing in frequency, sophistication, or severity. Keeping up with the latest developments focused on security vulnerability or security is proving very challenging. So, what should individuals and entities across NGIA understand about security when they talk about web applications? Yeah,
so ever vigilant, right? That needs to be the theme that we all go after, is to constantly look for things. You need to if you're a big enterprise and you're trying to rein this problem in, you got to have good vendors that have a good understanding of this stuff. You got to have great folks inside that have a good understanding. The most passionate information security professionals out there are constantly learning, constantly doing research, constantly trying to find the next thing before the next guy does. We're always challenged with, especially in web security, a new technology will come down the line. A great example of this is Angular. Angular is a JavaScript language or framework that allows you to build really nice front ends. It was developed by Google. The idea was it would be completely secure, and we've heard that a million times. Last January, a security researcher that a lot of us in the web community know found a way to break the security in Angular. That became a really huge problem just simply because the developers adopted it thinking that it was a secure platform and did no further study, did no additional steps to ensure that security. And then when it breaks, everybody's in a real tight spot because now they have all this stuff deployed and they have to unwind all of it and try to figure out how to solve that problem. So when we see these new technologies come out to make it easier for the human to interact with our application or easier to build an application, oftentimes it injects security problems as you build it.
Yes, very true. Now, security is fundamentally about protecting assets in cyberspace, geospace, and space. Now, when we focus on cyberspace, assets could be a web page, it could be a customer database, as you talked, a few minutes before, or it could be a backend database or web connectivity or reputation. Now,
Right.
as web infrastructure and applications are defined, identified, installed, or analyzed, how are potential security threats and its associated risk identified, evaluated, understood, and managed at this point, across entities, depending on whichever industries they are part of.
Yeah, and that's a race I've been chasing at Qualys now for going on 5 years. We've developed tools and products that allow for you to kind of rein all that in and understand it, and then run security testing on your entire infrastructure. And it's a great thing that you pointed out. Assets can be anything. And what we're seeing a lot more of now is organizations that go to rapid development. I'll say the cloud, right? So they're in AWS, they're in Azure, they're in all the different type of cloud environments that you can get into, and they build application infrastructure out there. What we've seen is some of these environments, when they initially get built, they have default passwords or they have default attack surface that's left open. And there's a good example of an organization that they built their entire company on AWS. Somebody took it over and deleted the entire company's IP. That's a huge risk. They put the company out of business. They had to start over, no backups. So then you start to ask the question, do I really want to go to cloud? The answer is probably yes, because of the huge advantages. But you have to be very careful about the way that you go to the cloud or the way that you develop these assets. We see organizations all the time will do things like, well, my firewall's got a problem, so I'll call my firewall vendor. Firewall vendor will have them open a port so that the vendor can help them, and then they'll forget to shut it, right? So that port's open, and now I have direct access into a database or something like that. So this kind of ever vigilant idea means you need to have continuous monitoring of your entire environment. Look at all of your infrastructure assets, look at all of your web assets, and anything you have IP on. It needs to be something that you really care about.
Yes, yes. Now, when individuals and entities across NGI do social networking or they have some kind of web presence, they naturally need to use web applications. I mean, that is goes without saying that there is a need for web application. Now, these applications are either developed in-house or downloaded for free or purchased and deployed from any external vendor. Now, irrespective of the origin or source of web application, users, that is individuals, or it could be entities across NGIA, they need to be prepared to face the security challenges that come with the application vulnerabilities. Now, there are many individuals and even some entities who think that they are secure because they have a firewall. Are they?
Yeah, so my 16-year-old walks around with a T-shirt that says your firewall is a speed bump, and that's the reality, right? You're just going to slow me down. I've got to figure out how to get around that. If you talk to any of the big industry pen testers out there, they'll tell you the first thing I do is go look to see what kind of firewall you have, because it's probably got vulnerabilities also, and things that allow for me to get past. So understanding that a firewall is a step is a really great idea. But what we tend to do in information security is build multiple perimeters. If your web application is outside of your firewall, that firewall doesn't help you at all. So then what you need to do is start to firewall that app off with either a web application firewall or use one of the cloud provider firewalls to sit in front of the application and protect it. But that's, again, just another step. We can bypass those things as well. So the basic premise in information security is make it hard and just keep making it harder. I like to tell people that, if you go to the amusement park, they won't let you on a roller coaster unless you're this tall, right? In information security, I want you to be this tall to break into my environment, right? You got to be this tall to ride the ride. And then what's going to happen is tomorrow you're going to need to be a little bit taller. And that's what we need to keep doing, is develop toward your expertise is going to be overwhelmed by my expertise, and we just keep fighting it that way.
That's a good example. That's a good way of putting it. Now, there is also a misconception that SSL, that is secure socket layer, will protect users irrespective of individuals or entities. Now, can SSL provide protection when it comes to web applications?
Yeah, so Qualys developed a tool that is the top of the line tool everybody uses for SSL management. And if you go out and look at the page at sslabs.com, you can put any URL in there and have it tested. And it gives you back a letter grade for not only the certificate that's installed on there, but how it's implemented. Can I bypass? So we attempt a few bypasses. We look at how the SSL implementation was built, because there are a lot of things that you can do where you just forget and check a box or set a configuration file that will diminish the security that SSL is providing you and allow for really terrible things. OpenSSL has had a lot of vulnerabilities in it. It's the most deployed SSL platform, and we're seeing more and more people take advantage of those things. So if you're worried about your bank's website, your hospital that you're logging into, whatever that thing might be, go to SSL Labs and test the server. If it gets an A, it's probably implemented well. If it gets an F, you may want to call them.
What is the name of that website, or where people can go and check out their website?
It's sslabs.com. sslabs.com.
That's good information. I'm glad you mentioned that. Now, there are reports that many individuals and entities across NGIO depend only on antivirus solution for their application security. Now, by using only an antivirus solution or the failure to encrypt critical individual or collective data or any other vital information, doesn't it send an open invitation to hackers to take advantage of the security gaps?
Yeah, so antivirus, there's a lot of us in the industry that will argue that it's not useful. And the reason why is it's basically herd immunity. If you get attacked by some new variant of a virus, eventually that'll get back to the antivirus company and I'll benefit from it, but you don't, right? And we've all sort of bought into this idea that, well, that's okay, maybe I won't be the one. But in reality, all of these signature-based antivirus tools have huge holes in them, right? They're signature-based. If I can get around the signature, then it all works. And if you talk to any of the leading penetration testing organizations, they'll tell you, yeah, first thing we do is find out what AV you're running, and then we develop malware that goes around it. So it's a good idea for the things that we already know about. It will keep them out, but it is not the thing that's going to keep out the latest and greatest.
That is true. Now, there are also reports that polymorphic malwares are difficult to detect with anti-malware programs. How should individuals and entities, manage constantly evolving risk of the polymorphism specific to viruses nowadays? It looks very difficult.
It is, and I don't think enough of the antivirus companies are doing heuristic or behavioral studies of malware. Malware all does the same thing. It installs, it tries to call home, it does it in different timing, but they all sort of do the same thing. We developed a website malware detection tool that when you visit the site, what we've done is we take a really vulnerable machine and go visit your website. If all of a sudden RAM spikes and disk starts being used and all these file writes start happening, it's obvious, right? You have some piece of malware on this site. At that point, does it matter if I fingerprint it and tell you exactly what that piece of malware is? Probably not, right? You just need to get rid of it. And the antivirus companies tend to focus on, well, what variant is it and who wrote this? And they try to get a lot of extra data around it. And realistically, what they need to do is write the signature and move on, right? So that way we can protect everybody as much as possible. Something else that really helps is understanding the validity of the sites that you go to. If you get an email from FedEx that says your FedEx package is trapped, please click this link. Go to FedEx.com. Don't click the link. Right?
Very true. That is a good piece of advice. A lot of people love to just click on those links and to make it easier, but it's always good to go to their website. You are right about that.
Right.
Now, it is also believed that many individuals and entities across NGIO do not understand the value of their critical assets or what they should be protecting, or what creates cybersecurity risk or vulnerabilities to cyber attacks, nor do they understand the profile or sophistication of potential attackers. Now, application security risks are not just brought by technology alone. What other factors play an important role in application security risk and vulnerabilities? The
Yeah,
technology is just one aspect of it.
it's very much just a small aspect detection and stuff. What I would recommend, or what I think needs to change, is there needs to be a fundamental shift in education. When we're teaching developers, we don't need to just teach them how computers function. We need to teach them how bad guys break their code. And so I do a lot of classes where I teach QA type techniques, so that's just completely quality assurance techniques, but they're all geared towards security. And if you can get your development staff to start to look at things that way, I need to be secure, what are the secure things I need to do, build a few champions inside of there, change our education system a little bit, we could get it so that the developers aren't pushing out so much bad code. There are a couple of organizations that are attempting to create what we would call cleanup classes or data flow classes, where when a user types something into a website, I will use this code to analyze what they typed in. So if it's an address field, it's not going to be very long. It's going to have numbers and letters. So I know that. If in the address field I see you start throwing a bunch of symbols at me, that means you're trying to break into the application. So some of this instrumented stuff, we call a RASP, sits in there and says, well, what is this that you're handing me? This doesn't look right. And it'll clean it up before it sends it back into the back end. And that makes things a little bit safer. It only works for certain things. Web Application Firewall, same thing, right? It's layers. We got to have lots of layers. But it really starts with, we need to kind of gut the education system for anybody that's doing computer science that wants to develop and understand there are security implications to everything that they write.
Absolutely. And now even like 3-year-olds are using computers. So I think this kind of education, as you're talking about, it should start right from the elementary school. It is, I think, the need of the time, and we cannot just go around it. Now, the human factor is said to be the weakest link in the security equation. The human factor plays such an important role in how, information security or application security or any kind of, security defenses work. So what role human factor would play in the application security equation, to make it very effective from your perspective?
Yeah, so, people always say the humans on the network are the problem. And I'd like for you to flip that around and say the humans on the network can be the solution. We just need to empower them, right? You've got bright, beautiful, terrific people that are running around in your company. All you need to do is get them to be on your side. Now, that takes a little bit of sway, and it takes some education. I've seen good education programs for things like phishing, where if you click the link, it'll play a video that says, don't click links, There's really small education things that you can do, and there's great big education things that you can do. I've seen organizations that'll have a month where they focus on security, and they'll reward people for asking the person behind them to see their badge before they tailgate through a door or something. These are the kinds of things that are going to shift the way attackers are going to have to come at us. Because right now the assumption is naive end user, right? That doesn't understand security and has no knowledge of what it is that they're trying to do. I would rather it be, I phone up the help desk and they say, no, I can't help you with that problem until, 10 things have happened. You can't just force me into this, right? Because the help desk is where a lot of problems happen. But just regular end users in the environment can be brought around to really shore up the security of your organization. Believe in them, and they'll come around to it.
Yes, true. Now, there's also this another trend that we have seen over the years, where corporations or businesses, they don't want to issue their own mobile devices or their own equipments for their employee or contractor use. So what impact bring your own device do you think has on application security?
Yeah, so that's that's been one of those things that I've really enjoyed talking about and working with organizations on. When you have a BYOD program, it means anything can walk into the door to your network. all of our thoughts and understanding on protecting our assets just go right out the window when anybody can bring anything. So there's some great little policy things that you can do. If you're a Google shop, you can turn on all their MDM solution and make it so that it basically containerizes all of the corporate assets into one spot in that device. If you leave the company, it just deletes and goes away. It doesn't hurt your device. You just lose all your corporate stuff that you shouldn't have access to anymore anyway. So those kinds of solutions enable that kind of technology. But the thing that you have to really understand is you can't approach BYOD like, well, we're just going to save money by everybody bringing in their own iPad. You're going to create more problems if you don't have a good plan and a good rollout idea going forward.
Absolutely, and then the corporation doesn't have a control over, the security updates, because you don't know what kind of updates each individual user, is having on their phone or on their iPads. They may not be updating at all. So you bring all those vulnerabilities to your corporation, but these are the decisions decision makers make. So it's making the security perspective very complex. Now, cloud computing is also a widely adopted infrastructure, and it brings along with its own security threats.
Right.
Point attacks on critical data and applications are common, with security breaches caused by cloud applications or cloud service usage. Now, since more individuals and entities across NGIO are currently using cloud is becoming a top security concern. So how secure are cloud applications, and what steps can be taken to bring security to web applications in cloud?
Yeah, so the fundamental idea with cloud is it's just somebody else's computer. That's the thing that we all need to understand. So when it's somebody else's asset, control of that asset is something that we don't really have a lot of. So the first step in enabling a cloud program or coming up with an idea where you're going to be using cloud services is to simply vet that organization. If it's Amazon or Azure or Google, they do a lot of things for security. They really want it to be a secure platform. I can argue that the platform in most cloud providers is way more secure than most enterprises out there have built. Because they don't want to go out of business, right? Their business is the security of your data. The problem then becomes, well, it's just somebody else's computer that you then layer on your application. That application can have problems. So approaching a cloud environment is just simply a matter of, do you understand the security posture of that environment? Do you understand what they're doing? And then when you start to put your things on there, you have to apply all the same techniques that you're using for any of your assets internally. So if you're building an application, you're enabling an API for a mobile app, you need to understand what's the connectivity look like, what's the average user look like, to understand what kind of data patterns you need to know.
True, very true. Now, security standards are a necessity. I mean, for digital globally, there is no other way to put it. It is a necessity. Now, hackers aren't only targeting entities across NGI, they're also threatening or targeting any individual across any nation, whichever nation it is, or any industry, any component. So how common are security standards across NGIO, that means nations, government, industries, organizations, and academia? Because unless we develop a global security standard that would enforce parallel deployment of that kind of security infrastructure, or parallel the development of processes, or risk management processes, or standards, we are not going to be able to achieve security, because everything is interconnected and interdependent now. So even if one computer is secure but the other computers are not secure, that are interconnected, then we all are at risk. So yeah. Are there any standards?
Oh, there's tons. The great thing about having standards in IT is if there's one, there's 50. And so when we look at, payment card industry, for instance, they have something called PCI DSS, the data security standard. Qualys is a big part of that. We do a lot of scanning and all sorts of things to ensure people are maintaining their PCI posture. But breaches still occur against credit cards, even for companies that are PCI compliant. So then they want to step up their game a little bit, and they maybe turn to a NIST standard, or they turn to some other industry standard. If they're in banking, it's FFIEC, or I can name probably 50 different banking standards. What I like to do is look for the organizations that are developing standards that are meaningful. So anybody out there that wants to see a good standard, you want to look at Australia's DSD, the Data Security Department, I think they are. The DSD, if you Google it, you'll see Australia DSD. It publishes a list of about 20 things that you should do for security, and it tells you if you don't do the top 4, don't bother doing the rest, because there are certain things that you have to do. You've got to take your default passwords off of all of your devices. Somebody will log in with that. There's real good information inside of there, and if you follow it line by line, you'll walk out of it with a much better security posture. But you got to remember, it's got to apply to every asset. If you miss one, that's the one they'll get in on.
No, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that will benefit our global viewers and listeners. Now, there are also many entities who believe that ensuring compliance with the rules set up by any individual corporation is equivalent to protecting the company against hacker attacks, because there is this perception that compliance is equal to risk management. And
yeah.
That is, I think, a big challenge, when you look at the amount of resources that are put towards just the compliance and the amount of resources are there for actual risk management. It is mind-boggling. So do you see that, this is one of the, issues that is impacting?
Yeah, and risk managers are always looking for that balance of, I'm complying, but I still have risks. How do I, apply techniques to get myself through that gap? And realistically, what needs to happen is the standards need to just be your base layer. It needs to be the foundation that you build off of. When I say you got to get taller every day in order to ride this ride, I mean that. You got to set up your standards as your baseline, and then start to find those things that really apply to your environment or that are really risky for you. For instance, if you're a bank, protecting user authentication is one of those things that PCI is going to say you got to have a password standard, right? Yeah, that's true. You got to have your password standard could be 1 character. As long as it's a standard, right, then everything's fine. So you can comply and create risk. So what you want to try to do is take that standard and say, all right, now what makes more sense, right? Maybe 2-factor authentication. PCI, I don't think any standard requires 2-factor auth today, but I want 2-factor auth everywhere, and I want to be notified when I've fired off something that on a device that I've never used before, and I want all of those things, right? Because that's going to create much more security. Does it create problems for the user? Not if you do it right. I've seen a lot of people do it wrong. A great example of this is an airline website that I use a lot. Recently said, here, we're going to give you, if you go to a new device, you're going to have to answer questions. And they came up with the questions and the answers. That's not a good way to do that, right? Because then people can guess them, right? It's not completely random. It's not something made up in my head. It's in this list somewhere. I can just figure it out. And that's not what you want. So when you start to look at risk versus compliance, you have to remember compliance doesn't remove the risk. It just makes it so that you can build on and take it out.
Yes, that is just the baseline. You're absolutely right. Now, many a times the software or application developers are so eager to push applications to global private or public markets that they don't focus on security. They're focused more on functionality. So as a result, security rarely gets effectively incorporated in the architecture phase. And with time, the number of major breaches that comes through the application layer keeps increasing, because whenever the applications are designed, mostly the security is not given priority at the design phase. So do you see a need for increased focus on security first architecture right at the planning stage?
Yeah, and there's actually, in large enterprise, we're starting to see a software security architect role come out of, they either come out of development or they come out of the pen testing organization, somebody that was prior developer. again, these people are, we refer to them as purple squirrels, right? They're rare. You can't find them. But it's definitely one of those things that we need to develop more of. Somebody needs to sit down at the requirements phase and say, authentication should work this way. The back end should look like this. That API should work in this manner. You know, in my research, I do a lot of research. I speak all over the place, and I do research and talk on the topics. And right now I'm doing research on web attacks against IoT, and I'm finding things like I can open my garage door from my laptop when I'm supposed to be using an app. That's not great, right? And I'm also seeing things like research that other people are doing on IoT for, you know, doing things like popping light bulbs and things like that, making the light bulbs explode because they're turning them on and off quickly. There's a lot of danger inside of this, right? Developers need to have that understanding, and they need to have somebody sitting there saying, no, don't do it that way. You know, this is the consequence of that, and show them the breaches, show them how getting through their software is going to be trivial. Once they see that and have an understanding, they'll figure out ways to, you know, avoid those kinds of situations.
Yes, yes. Now, if you are that purple, you know, the term that you used, if you have to, you know, guide someone, you know, who's just starting to design or, you know, plan the application, what would you tell them that should be the foundation of application security? What would that security rely on? What would you guide them? How would you guide them?
It comes down to trust. What ends up happening is developers trust that the end user is only going to provide them with accurate input for their needs. And so when I ask you for your password, I expect you to type in this, you know, sort of character set. But what ends up happening is we attack the application by seeing, what did you do to put bounds around that? So you're implicitly trusting what I hand you, and you should trust nothing that I hand you. If you're giving me a session token, know that I'm going to replay it, reuse it, move it around, change it, because I want to see what's the behavior on the other side. Maybe I can expose an error message that gives me something else. Application security is all about sending in wacky input, getting some kind of page back, and then interpreting what that means. That interpretation is the piece that is missing in the education for most folks. So if you're starting out in this, you pick up some books, right? If you type web application security into Amazon, you're going to get a bunch of books that'll fire back at you. Many of them are written by great researchers that work for, you know, really amazing companies. Some of them are just guys that are, you know, really curious about things and they end up breaking stuff. But in all cases, I always pick up some nugget, some great thing that, you know, advances either my application security ability or gives me insight as to how a framework works or something like that.
Yes, yes. Now, let's say, you know, the team goes through all the guidelines that you just, you know, talked about, and they followed all the steps. Now, even if an application, web application was built with security in mind, what will be the impact of network vulnerabilities?
Yeah. So now you know, applications are layered on a stack, right? Servers are built to do something. You build it, you put an application stack on top of it, now you've got an application server. There are two places to attack. Actually, there's three places to attack an application server. I can attack your code directly. I can attack the application serving layer, the Apache or IIS server. And then I can attack the underlying operating system. And if you've left a bunch of holes in that, you left Telnet open or something like that, I can just get in onto the network box and I win. And that's the case for breaches usually from insiders, right? They understand the architecture better than anybody else, and they can you know, get onto the server and walk away from it. So what we recommend to the organizations that we've partnered up with or that are customers of ours is continuous monitoring. You have to always look to see, did a port open that I didn't know about yesterday? And if it did, I need it to alert me. I need my systems to tell me, hey, this thing all of a sudden is vulnerable, and it wasn't yesterday. And so we've been building tools along that ilk for quite some time now. And it allows for us to empower our customers to know that server is secure, as secure as I can make it, right now. And if anything changes, I get alerted to it. So that way I can go fix those things.
Good. Now, what role host security plays in application security?
What role does what security?
Host security?
Oh, host security. Yeah, so it has to be patched. Has to be, all of the things that you expect need to be there. And all of the methodologies that you use for any aspect of security need to be put in place. So same thing, continuous monitoring, looking at all the pieces, and understanding where the vulnerabilities may lie.
Now, as entities analyze, individuals or entities, they analyze their infrastructure and applications, they identify the potential threats and vulnerabilities. Now, each threat presents a degree of risk, and security is all about risk management and implementing effective, management procedures, mitigation processes and procedures. Do the risk management strategies? Now, what approach do entities have for web application risk management?
Yeah, and that's been probably the biggest challenge that we've been trying to overcome with a lot of our clients. I have about 3,100 clients that use my application security tools in their environments, and the one thing that they constantly want to know is, what's the first thing I got to fix, right? They're trying to do risk management through understanding where their vulnerabilities are and getting rid of them. And that is an approach, but if you step away from your environment a little bit and look at the risk posture of the entire environment, things change a little bit. What happens is, and we don't do this enough, is an organization that will threat model their applications, that will look and say, if there was a breach here, what would happen? What would be the end result? Right? Standard risk management process, but applied a little bit differently, in that they look at the application and say, all right, the threat is there's a database on the back end that has a bunch of user accounts in it. That's something I need to really focus on and protect. If the threat is, you can throw a whole bunch of XML at this thing and maybe run the disk over and it'll stop, that's an easy risk to manage, right? We can just control the amount of data that you can throw at me. And so once you've done the threat modeling, the risk management just comes into play, sort of naturally all by itself. But not enough organizations threat model their applications. Remember I said that software architect guy's a purple squirrel, right? We've got to try to figure out a way that we can start to threat model and approach these things in a more pragmatic and kind of a manner that will scale out better.
Yes, very true. Now, the web applications are not just, you find them on computers or, they're also on tablets, they're also on mobile phones. So how can mobile application security be achieved or enhanced? I mean, is there anything different that we have to, for parameters that we have to focus on other than, the web applications?
Yeah, and that's an astute observation. It's one of those things that people don't really think about, is they just download the app and put it on their phone. I worked with a government in Asia that had just developed an application to do proxy voting. So they wanted all of their investors to vote on the next board of directors or whatever it was. They asked me to do some analysis on the app, and I looked at it and I said, well, this is an interesting application because it does what you say. It submits votes to the server. But one of the side things that it does is it copies all the contacts on the phone and sends them to this other server that's in China. And that's a result of somebody borrowed a library, somebody copied some code, probably didn't even realize that this is going on. Or if they did, then this is really an attack that we need to start to look at. But losing all of your contacts is kind of bad. You probably don't want that to happen. But remember, that's just a disk read, just like reading all of your pictures, right? Pictures of your children going to China is probably not something that you want. And so we all take a look at these mobile apps and we look at them from the aspect of, well, they enable me to, find Pokemons or whatever. But the reality of it is I'm being tracked, I'm being watched, I have audio channels that are opening up and recording conversations. Mobile applications make it worse. And so there isn't a really good way to measure the security of mobile apps. We've developed some tools, and there's organizations that have developed tools to look at this thing. But I don't think that there's enough knowledge in the user environments that are out there. I've seen applications that have 10 million downloads that install malware on your phone. You know, that means 10 million people have this malware running on their phone. And they wouldn't download it if their phone would tell them it had malware, right? They wouldn't install it if we would just put a little bit of security in place for these things, but it's not in anybody's interest to do that.
That is very true. There is not much money in that, right? So people don't focus on that. But you are absolutely right that that is something that we have to be very concerned about, because it's impacting security of each and every individual. Now, vulnerability scanners, more specifically, if we say web application scanners, also known as penetration testing tools, or you can say white hackers, ethical hacking tools, or any term that we use, they have been historically used to automate the security testing of different requests or responses by entities across NGI. Now, do you think these penetration tools are effective in identifying the security vulnerabilities in web applications?
Yeah, so writing a web app scanner is what I do at Qualys. Obviously I believe in them. So I've got about, I said 3,100 organizations that use my tool. We protect 130,000 applications, and that number just grows year on year. If you have 10 applications in your environment, realistically, you can have one pen tester and they'll be able to handle that. In fact, the throughput of a pen tester is about 40 applications a year. That's one assessment each year on each app. Vulnerabilities are found daily. So the problem or the solution that web scanners bring you is I can check for all these new things constantly. And if you're using an organization that writes this tool as an enterprise-grade professional tool, it's not something that you threw together or downloaded, there's a research team behind that, right? I've got an entire research team that all they do all day is figure out ways to break frameworks and stick that into the tool so that way we can, put tests in for those sorts of things. We are constantly looking at this. An example is if I look at this same time period last year till now, we've added 200 new capabilities into the tool over that time frame. That means over the time frame, if you've been using that tool, you would have received 200 new ways to test things and do things. Those kinds of numbers and that kind of scale is only achievable through automation. You can't sit down, well, you can, like I said, it's a really simple math problem. If you have 10,000 applications, I've got a financial organization that's got 10,000 apps. Divided by 40, and that's how many pen testers you need to go hire. Keep in mind, there's about 1,000 of them on the planet, so you're never going to get to the right place.
That is true. That is true. It is a lot of resources required. And now it is reported that, especially for the financial industry, banking and financial corporations, that they have been the very early adopter for the automated tools associated with application vulnerability detection, and it is commonly held within the financial firms that both black box testing and white box testing tools are needed in the pursuit of application security. How often these tools are used, the black box testing tools and white box? Is it like daily, weekly, monthly? What is the frequency?
So just to throw a little clarity, black box testing is I fire this tool at it, right? So that's a web scanner, basically. White box testing means I know a lot about this app. I probably have its source code. What I recommend to anybody is that these tools be used as part of the development lifecycle, because that puts it in the right pace. As you write code, you should be testing your code. As you QA code, you should be doing security testing on your code. It does a couple of things. It allows you to find the vulnerabilities at the time of creation, so it trains your developers to understand, hey, I can't use this library anymore, it's causing a problem. But the other thing that it really does is it decreases the cost to repair the vulnerability. If you look at the latest report that IBM and Ponemon did, once you get all the way out to production, it costs about 14 times more to fix something than if you fix it right at the time that you put it together. So if you're using a value center to do development, if you're developing in India, China, wherever, that organization is going to be putting code together. You're saving money by using folks in a different part of the world. and then it's costing you 14 times more to have the problem go into production. So realistically, the cost savings is all written out. Injecting these tools, both white box and black box testing early and using them persistently is going to get you really far in this problem. It's also going to drive the cost out of your vulnerability repair, right? The things that you need to fix, remediation, but it's not going to provide you with additional throughput, right? You're not going to get any more code out because of this. You're just going to have more secure code, and it's going to eventually be cheaper for you. The pace should go lockstep with your development pace, whatever that is. If you're releasing every 30 days, you should be testing every 30 days. It doesn't make any sense to go outside of that because you're not going to be fixing anything inside that pace anyway.
Yes, good point, good point. Now, tools and training are important and necessary for application security, but improved application security will also require deeper organizational changes, like changes in values, accountability, responsibility at all levels. How are entities across India looking to achieve that? Because, you know, it's not like we get some tools, we do some kind of testing, and we are going to have application security. It requires a lot of changes because there are a lot of risk variables involved here. So how are entities, you know, approaching that, or are they approaching that direction?
Yeah, so we're seeing more and more uptake in education. Some of the guys that I know that do education for development organizations are seeing an uptick in requests, right? They're all busy and don't have enough time to go on vacation and stuff. That's how you know you're succeeding. But the reality of it is something that has to be affected across a broad spectrum. Your users should understand it. Your developers should understand it. Anybody in the organization should understand that the application causes a new kind of problem. If you back away from this idea of cybering and web and all that, and think about how you deal with an organization today, and turn that into a physical manifestation, you know, I would be going to some warehouse somewhere that says Amazon on the outside of it, and I would be taking things, you know, and buying them, just like we used to. We don't do that anymore. We send a web signal in, and suddenly the stuff shows up at our house. We're dealing with organizations in such a new way that we need to have a big shift in how we understand how we deal with them.
Education is the key here. Now, let's talk about the application procurement process, because there are a lot of applications where, you know, IT security is not consistently engaged in procuring and contracting for new applications, and that, I think, it plays an important, you know, vulnerability here, because if the procurement process doesn't have the security component embedded into that, then, you know, there are a lot of vulnerabilities that we are inviting into the organization.
Right. And to this, I say quite simply, you got to beat them up with contract language. There are a couple of healthcare companies out there that are notorious for, if you report a vulnerability to them, they just tell you they don't care. If you have it in your contract that you won't give them any more money until they fix it, then it becomes one of those things where they do suddenly care. And so you really have to have that procurement process, including security, especially if you're buying a service. Almost everybody in the planet now uses ADP to pay their employees. That's a service. You log into that. HR is all run out of, you know, Taleo or one of these applications that you can go out and buy. Salesforce.com is managing customer relationships for more organizations than anyone else. These are all things that you purchase. I've got plenty of pen tester friends that have great stories about making themselves the CEO and giving themselves $1 million raise and, you know, all that stuff during the testing phase of taking in these applications. You have to include your security folks, right? A web app is a web app. Whether you wrote it or bought it, you still have to test it.
Very true. Now, this is a very simple question that I'm going to ask, but you know, it has a huge implications. I know individuals don't, you know, have any idea about how many applications they have on their, you know, equipments like cell phones or their tablets or computers. But do entities ever take an inventory of all the applications they have developed or possessed?
Yeah, so we talked about standards a little while ago, and almost every standard out there starts with know what you have. Right? You can't lock the door if you don't know you have a door. And so we always say you need to have a good inventory. Now, I've walked into, I don't know, probably 1,000 of the customers of mine that are, that are big and trying to wrestle things like that. And I would say it's a very small percentage that have an accurate count. Almost everybody else will say, I have some unknown number of applications. I don't know what it is. I don't know where they are. Can you help me find them? And the answer is yes there, but the reality of it is having that inventory is crazy important. I mean, what if you found a problem with it? Who do you go call? Just those basic things are kind of missing. And that's the reason why I brought up the DSD, line 1, know what you have, right? If you haven't done line 1, don't do line 2. Go get an inventory and figure this out.
Now, there's a growing belief that a holistic approach to security that covers multiple layers, sorry about that, including the network, host, and application is required to achieve the goal of hack-resilient applications on all platforms. Do you see the need for this holistic approach?
Yeah, and it's one of those things where technology hasn't solved this problem. We haven't solved this problem with 20 years of pen testing. Like we definitely need to look at this from the perspective of education, tools, techniques. I mean, it's just all put together, and it needs to be something that's pushed down from the top. The successful organizations that have good security programs have a culture of security built by their CEO.
Yes. Now, while security is fundamentally based on people and processes, there are a number of technical solutions to consider when designing, building, and testing secure web applications. What technical solutions would you recommend to our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, so you got to take a look at the code that you're writing. So a static analysis approach is a way to go. Once it's up and instrumented and functioning, a dynamic analysis is what you need. So static analysis is that crystal box testing, or however you want to say it, white box. Black box testing or web scanning, once it's up and functioning, is another piece of that. And then as you move down the line, you have to have humans check these things. Web scanners and static analysis or binary analysis, scanning of the code, is only going to get you to the point where you see things like, well, this data is not being controlled. But what about logic flaws? What about doing things out of order, right? That's where a penetration tester comes in and gives you much better coverage and better understanding. So as you move through the phases, you're going to go through these sorts of things: static analysis, dynamic analysis. You have a pen tester on there. And then it's going to go into perpetual analysis, where you're running a dynamic analyzer on it every week. You've got a pen tester coming in quarterly or something like that. Or you have a security team that's doing analysis on it. And then the final piece is watching it, instrumenting it with either some kind of IPS, an intrusion prevention device, or an intrusion detection device, or putting a web app firewall in front of it. Instrumenting even just the logs with Splunk and developing alerting on that is going to be that watching phase, right? Where we're seeing, are people actively attacking me? And if they are, is it working? And I think that is one of those phases that just no one does. They put the technology in place and then they never look at it again. And the humans are a big part of the technology, right? People process technology. We all like to beat that drum and say it. But sometimes we forget that once we have the technology, we still have the people. We need to have
people. Hopefully, maybe in next 20, 30 years, the human factor will slowly start coming down as we have more robots. And sorry, I think I'm coming down with something. So with artificial intelligence, we would see changes, but at this point, yes, humans plays a very important role. Now, let me ask you this. What is that one thing you would like to change when it comes to application security?
The one thing. I got to pick one, eh? I think that it probably would have to do with educating developers. I think that change needs to be something that would cause, if we were to do that, it would have the greatest effect. There needs to be a mindset within developers that the code that they're writing causes problems. Now let's figure out the solutions. And once we get to a phase where You know, when Word first started underlining the thing that you misspelled, we all started spelling differently, right? Or we started using that as our spell checker. We don't have a good development environment idea like that. What I would love to see is the IDEs that are out there, the development environments that are integrated for .NET and Java and those sorts of things. I'd love to see that when they ask for an input, put a little underline under it and say, what are you going to do to clean this input up? That would cause, you know, probably the greatest effect into application security today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, would you like to share information about Qualys' products and services that would help our global viewers and listeners with reference to application security?
Yeah, so you know, we've been known for a long time as a scanning solution that can look for vulnerabilities in infrastructure. About 6 years ago, we started doing web application security as well. We have a web application firewall. Large research team where we have about 650 employees at this point, spread all over the world, and most of them are engaged in engineering in some way. Everybody on my team can do web security techniques. There isn't anyone that works for me that can't do cross-site scripting, proof of concepts, or things like that. And so I really believe that everybody needs to be invested in the idea of security that works at our organization, and that's true. Everybody is that way. One of the great things about us, besides our amazing people that we have, is the technology that we put out really enables organizations to rein this problem in. Whether it be application security, we can cover all of your apps. I haven't met an organization that has more apps than I can scan. But we can also give you great contextual data around our findings. For instance, on the 19th of September, just a few days ago, there was a new WordPress plugin vulnerability that came out. We have a feed that sent alerts to all of our customers to say, go look for this thing. And if you find it, here's the solution to fix it. We have a nice big long research document on how it works, what the problems are, how to get rid of it, all that kind of thing. That gives you that contextual go fix it now thing that I think is missing. You know, everybody needs to patch, and we all know that. We all have systems to make that work. But all of these other little things, you know, check this configuration setting, go look for this thing, those need to be kind of thrown in your face. And that's what we've learned over the years is we need to have good alerting for that. So our continuous monitoring solution looks for ports that open that shouldn't be. Our Threat Protect solution tells you all about the things that are out there. We've just recently released an agent that allows for you to gather really deep intelligence on any device that you have in your environment, no matter where it is, no matter how it's deployed. So if Lenovo sends out a flash alert that says, hey, this firmware version needs to be updated on these kinds of devices, you can just search your inventory, find those things, and go get it fixed. So moving toward resolution is what our company is all about. We take our great people, we apply it into our technology, and enable our customers to solve these problems on a daily basis.
Great, that's good. Sorry about that. That's good information. So thank you, Jason, for participating in Risk Roundup today. We appreciate your thoughtful insight on web application security. Our global viewers and listeners would benefit tremendously from the guidelines you provided on securing the web application. And even if a single individual or entity is able to prevent a cyber breach based on the discussions we had today, this Risk Roundup dialogue has been of service. We thank you for that.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's been really fun.
Wonderful, Jason. So now individuals and entities across NGIOA are deploying new web applications faster than ever. Given the increasing vulnerability to web application security and the speed at which the web application ecosystem is evolving and how much risk it can bring to individuals and entities across NGIOA, it is becoming a cause of great concern. Risk Group Cybersecurity Risk Research Center and Strategic Security Risk Research Center are created for this very reason to identify, evaluate, and manage the risk facing NGIOA in CGS and discuss, debate, and define necessary framework, structure, processes, tools, and technologies to manage the security risk of not only the digital global age, but also of the coming technological superconvergence. We at Risk Group believe that risk management, security, and peace walk together hand in hand. Though security is related to management of threats, and peace through the management of conflict. Risk management is related to management of security vulnerabilities as well as management of conflict. It is not possible to conceive any one of the three without the existence of the other two. All three concepts feed into each other. We believe that the security we build for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secure for everyone across nations. Tradition becomes our security, so if we build a culture of managing risk effectively, it will lead us to security and security will lead us to peace. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the risk roundups, to watch the risk roundup videos or hear the risk roundup podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayshree Pandya, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time.